When the Horizon rig explosion killed 11 men in the Gulf and led to the worst oil spill in American history, BP promised to make everything right. But 3 years later, many people BP hired to clean up the mess say their exposure to the chemicals has led to serious illnesses with no immediate prospect of being fully or fairly compensated. This is Jory Danos wearing cold weather clothes in the heat of August 2011. Sick, and he says coughing up blood.
How would you describe what you were feeling?
How can I describe how I was feeling was living hell.
Danos, who's 32, was a cleanup worker on the BP oil spill. His wife Jolene shot this and other videos to document how they believe the chemicals he was exposed to impacted his health. Danos says he was part of the Vessels of Opportunity program.
We was skimming the oil. We was 8 miles from the site. We was 8 miles from the site, oil everywhere.
Other crews were pumping a chemical dispersant called Corexit into the plume of oil pouring out of the sea floor. And planes were spraying more of it onto the oily water from above.
And it got to the degree that the planes started flying over us. And when the planes started flying over us, you could notice the different texture in the oil. And the oil was changing and everything else, and we were sprayed direct.
He says planes flew overhead several times when he was out there, changing a clear, sunny day into a mist.
And how is that you go from 1 mile radius to a next, that it's clear, and then the next is just nothing but a foggy mist that burns your skin, makes you cough.
Danos says this hazard communication resource manual was supposed to be issued to the cleanup workers. It calls for safety glasses, solvent-resistant gloves, and if the Corexit dispersant is sprayed, it says an organic vapor mask or a particle mask should be used. But Danos says he and the other workers were never shown this manual. He says he asked for protection, a respiratory mask, and special gloves and boots.
And they told me I'd be fired or I'd be relieved of my duties because it'd be bad media attention.
The next day, he says his boss gave him a paper surgical mask and rubber gloves.
Vapors and a mist will just come right through it. So is there protected by this? There's no protection at all.
Today, Jory Danos is on disability, says he has suffered mental impairment, cannot focus, has insomnia, irritability, takes all of these medications just to cope, says he cannot drive due to a condition that causes him to lock up in a seizure-like condition.
He fell on the floor and he just tightened. Every muscle in his body was tightened. You could see his jaws were clenched together like he was grinding his teeth.
His wife, Jolene Plaisance, has resorted to shooting video of these various episodes to verify his medical problems.
Just so I can show people it's just not, he's not crazy. This is really what's going on.
Jolene and Jory have 3 daughters, and they say his condition has shattered their family life. And she's afraid it could cut Jory's life short.
Will I lose my husband and raise these kids I have by myself? Because that's what's going to happen. I believe that with all my heart. I'm not saying tomorrow, but it's going to happen sooner than it should have.
Physician and former state senator Mike Robichaux has seen 113 patients he believes are suffering health effects from the oil spill and the cleanup solvents.
People from Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana all had identical symptoms. They all had identical problems. These people had no way of knowing who each other were, and there's no way from the connected for stories.
He says they were all extremely ill with symptoms that resembled what soldiers suffered in the 1991 Persian Gulf War.
The biggest things that were prominent were related to the neurological system, okay? The memory loss, the irritability, the fatigue, and tremendous fatigability.
I was in a convulsion, or full convulsion, in a ball on the floor of my boat. Every muscle in my body was drawn up to where I couldn't move for over 15 minutes.
Fishing captain Darla Rooks says contaminated water poured over her from fishing nets at one point. And she was exposed to the contaminated slop from oily boom stacked on her boat.
We had headaches, total amnesia, we call it brain fog, just total like a Alzheimer's patient to that effect, to that point where you don't remember where your children are, you don't remember that you're cooking.
In response to questions this report raises, BP referred us to 2 reports. This one contains various statements BP assembled about dispersants, including this. To combat the 2010 spill, BP used 1.8 million gallons of dispersant, primarily Corexit 9500, which was approved by the U.S. Coast Guard and EPA for this use. BP also referred us to this study, which questions lab studies that claim to measure how toxic dispersants can be when used in large bodies of water. The American Petroleum Institute paid for this study. And BP issued this statement. Use of dispersants during the Deepwater Horizon oil spill response was coordinated with and approved by federal agencies. Based on extensive monitoring conducted by BP and the federal agencies, BP is not aware of any data showing worker or public exposure to dispersants at levels that would pose a health or safety concern. And yet BP has agreed to this medical claim settlement. A committee of plaintiff attorneys in a federal class action lawsuit has reached an agreement with BP on a list of health problems for which the company could provide compensation. But here's the problem.
None of the serious illnesses that I had seen and treated in 113 people, none of the serious illnesses were included.
Dr. Robichaud says the agreement only lists less serious, more short-term problems like cough, rash, nasal complaints. The long-term, more serious problems that patients complain to Robichaud about, like headaches, memory loss, fatigue, irritability, are not listed in the agreement. Robichaud believes the real health victims are being victimized again. But sources with the attorneys committee that reached the settlement with BP insist it will provide the most medical benefits for the most people. They say people with more serious illnesses can file claims for compensation even if the medical problems develop years from now. The compensation can range from hundreds of dollars to more than $60,000.